Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Enterprise Dish. Like us, love us, or hate us, it's the boys of Ohio holding it down here in the it's called the Midwest, but like to people who are outside the United States, they're going to think like we're like Kansas or Nebraska or like somewhere over by Texas, but like, and we can't say
No,
Mideast because that's a whole different part of the world.
you've
But
hit on something that I actually would love to just spend an hour on talking about because, so Brad is in the Ohio city of Cincinnati.
hmm
I'm in the Ohio city of Columbus, but Ohio is kind of a funky one in Midwestern terms. I like to say that
hmm
Cleveland is the last city in the East. Cincinnati is the first or the last city in the South or just on the edge of it. And then like Indianapolis kind of without a doubt is just no doubt Midwest. But then
right.
you go up to like Detroit and that kind of like Great Lakes. It's not
Yeah.
quite Midwest. So where does that leave where I'm at in Central Ohio? So that's actually kind of an interesting conversation. I love getting into that with people, but I'll align Midwest more than anything.
Yeah, we're somewhere. I mean, to put it, I don't know what it's probably even less for you, but for people who have zero idea of understanding of geography of where we are, I am a 65 to 70-minute flight from New York City and about a 50-minute flight to Washington, D.C. So just put that into perspective wherever you live. That's how far away Rick and I are roughly from the Atlantic Ocean.
I'm less than 4 hours from Buffalo, New York. So put it that way.
Oh, yeah.
That's I don't know, kind of interesting, right? I'm 3 hours from Pittsburgh
hmm
and 3 hours from Detroit, 3 hours from Indianapolis. It's actually it's kind of a funny story. There's a lot of people buy their satellite um, television plans based here in Ohio because we're exempt from all the NFL blackout rules,
hmm
and it's this weird mix. It's like Bengals, Browns, Steelers, Lions,
Yep.
and Colts fans just equally distributed in this city. So it's very interesting like that.
And there's a lot of college basketball too, if you're into that sort, especially in
Oh, that's right.
Cincinnati, because you've got UC, Xavier, you've got Dayton right there, you've got Kentucky. There's a couple teams in Kentucky that are less than a 90-minute drive. So
There's the Ohio State thing going
yeah,
on
there's the
too.
whole Ohio State and Michigan football thing too. That kind of
Well, the Buckeye
yep,
basketball is rocking it this year, and the
yeah, that is
ladies
true.
I think the ladies are rocking it as well for a long time. So it's a good sports area. A lot of teams, and biggest news ever. There's like spring football going on now.
I know.
Like a lot of the Division 2 and 3 have put their seasons to the spring. So it's something to look forward to.
There's a lot going on. Hopefully, we're on the positive side of life and other things. Rick, people listening to this podcast and potentially one of the reasons they tuned in, March 2nd through the 4th, which is that next week.
Next week.
Yep. I keep forgetting that February is over. March 2nd through the 4th, you've got Ignite, where there's going to be, and full transparency before this episode, I was like, Rick, there's not a whole lot going on this month. And then I was like, oh yeah, Ignite is happening in a week, and there's going to be a dump of content here. But yeah, that's going to be a big event.
Yeah, in fact, yesterday I just did the rehearsal for our session
Nice.
at Ignite, and I got to tell you, Brad, we went crazy creative. Um, I'll be the first to admit that I'm completely sick and tired of virtual events. I'll admit it. I'm not
Yeah.
going to go to any virtual event unless I'm paid to do it
hmm
or I need it for MVP-ness. Period.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm
hmm
not. I can't do it. I love Teams and I love good technology, but I am genuinely missing authentic human interaction.
Yes.
That being said, our Ignite presence aligns to both 1 and 2 rules of my will do virtual events. I'm a little bit grumpy
Mm.
evangelist now. I don't know if you're sensing that, but we did something totally different. So Corinne and I, who's aspiring talent in the Office 365 space,
hmm
she works here with me. Her and I schemed up something, the Veeam Tech Quiz Show. It's
Ooh,
on the agenda at Ignite. You can win basketball hoops. Speaking of basketball,
basketball hoops.
I'll tell you a secret preview here for this crowd. It's basically, think of the television show Jeopardy.
hmm
We're making it interactive. Every attendee can pick the questions to be asked,
Oh,
and
wow.
even if everyone who gets selected wins. So it's like we're going to be giving out 16 sets of basketball hoops, and very interactive, very dynamic, completely unscripted. We're pretty excited for that.
That sounds legit. And so what is the name of your session?
Veeam Tech quiz.
There you go.
Veeam something. Veeam Tech Quiz. Just look for Rick. It's the only one with Rick Vanover.
I was trying to think if the session catalog is live yet, because I could link to it below this podcast. But
well, that just means you have to get it out by next week. Then you have a deadline for yourself.
This will be up probably this week. Yeah, it'll go up this week, Thursday probably. But it's a lot of it's aligned to those Ignite sessions going live, because you got to be able to link. Anyways, so if you see a link down below to a session, that means Brad was able to find it. If you don't see a link down in the session below, go and search for Rick on the Ignite catalog.
I guess I could know where my own session is. That would be smart of me too, and could be on me. But we've got a host and 3 panelists, and it's going to be fun times.
Now, Rick, I put this next item on the agenda. It's worth discussing, but you'll see the connection here in a second. So Microsoft announced a couple weeks back a new big investment into the city of Atlanta. And they're putting a new data center, I believe, region, which actually consists of 2 separately installed data centers for redundancy and all that good stuff. But I was wondering, because there's a lot of big companies in Atlanta, one of them who you fly on very frequently. I'm wondering if Microsoft is putting a huge data centers right there to try. Isn't Coke also based out of Atlanta? I know Delta is, Coke, for sure.
UPS, yeah, a lot of big names are based there for sure. I saw that news, and there's a lot of good reasons, and a little bit of Rick Raft here is that I used to work in the supply chain execution field, so I understand quite a bit about site selection, logistics, and things like that. And even though that applies very specifically to moving hard goods, it can apply very specifically for data center builds too. And so, one thing that's going to stick right out of as a positive is that you could have very low latency for internet and connectivity, probably as far through all of Texas, probably up to Chicago, through the East Coast, New York Metro, and definitely all Florida. So you have a really good catchment from a latency perspective. That's one of the things that goes into site selection of things like this. Transportation hub, that's a good call there. Veeam has a big office north of Atlanta. It's our 3rd largest city market, with our largest city market in the U.S. there. We've based a lot of our regional, like America, North America, and a little bit of LATAM stuff there. You can get good talent there. There's good transportation in and out and through both air and ground. Moderate weather. There's a lot of good things that come in there from a site selection standpoint. We usually have our annual kickoff event there in Atlanta. Just the logistics can't be dismissed with that many people there and the ease of access to that city. I like Atlanta. In fact, I've gone there a lot over the years, both through and specifically too. So when I think about Microsoft, they've even, partnered a lot with Atlanta. Like there have been a number of Ignite events that have been there as well through the years. There's the conference center, the World Congress Center. So, there's a lot going on there. I think though that this might be the first of these big ones, right? Because maybe they'll put another one out west. And when they say a big data center, that's not Azure. It's probably Microsoft's own matters. Do you know, and I couldn't quite tell, and honestly they wouldn't tell us, but if it's related to, say, like the Jedi matter.
I was wondering that too.
Yeah.
If that's a redundant location for things. For people who aren't familiar, I believe Jedi was a $10 billion contract that Microsoft won, building out government-related stuff. And so they very clearly need redundant capabilities for those locations. And Atlanta's far enough away from D.C. that it might tick that box.
Yeah. And the other thing is, you see this in Azure. I mean, as a partner, I have access to a special type of Azure that behaves a little bit differently, but also serves in some areas as a preview for what will show up in mainstream Azure. And they do a lot of like under the hood DR tests and things like that to keep these services resilient and available. And it's, I've never had like an outage or a problem, or a loss of data. So Microsoft knows what they're doing. I think I am really happy to see that they're building and really taking their story public about it. In fact, just today, I dropped one of my posts in about Azure Storage Services that'll kind of help the readers go through and pick, a couple of the tips that I've learned along the way on how to start consuming Azure storage or add more storage services to your accounts and things like that. But no, they know what they're doing, Azure or not. Good stuff.
This brings us to our next question. I almost jumped this one up the list as we were talking about traveling, but we got an interesting question in this week from Andrew, and he says, we have a remote data collection facilities, and as of 3 weeks ago, connectivity at 2 locations went from minimal to none. Does Rick have any suggestions for backing up or transferring this data besides putting it on SSDs and literally shipping it home?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so that's an interesting one, Andrew. And I'll go through a few kind of scenario examples because I've actually done, let's just call it data center migrations, not over the wire. Okay, so that's basically what you're doing. It's an unplanned data center migration that the wire isn't existent. And when I say wire, I'm going to presume that cell connectivity isn't going to be an option. So, if you could strike a deal with unlimited 5G hotspot with a carrier and stick a wire on it, that might be something to consider. But let me kind of go the other direction. And I'll actually kind of share with you an example. When I worked at a previous role, we acquired a company, and we were in the business of consolidating data centers and not necessarily removing people, right? So that, you could take that another direction, but we wanted one data center that had the resources associated with our business. And when we acquired this other data center, we basically migrated it physically. And so what we ended up doing was, number one, back it all up. Number two, make a production copy. So things like replication or things like cloning of virtual machines and all those other types of things. Really depends on what you have. Now, in this particular example, I just did a force hard everything virtualized because it's much more encapsulated and portable. And from there, we loaded it on a truck and brought it to the other data center, and then concurrently had another member of our team in a car drive the backup in a separate vehicle. Very important when you do a migration like that. I put this in. This was kind of weird. I was a little squirty guy at the time, squirty. But anyways, we're in the meeting, and I'm like, hey, I got an idea. We should have the backup drive separate of the actual data center equipment, because what if this all falls in the Allegheny River? It'd be, and because there were like $2 million of receivables in that data. Yeah. Then they're like, idea of the week, little guy. So just give some thought to that, Andrew, about an unplanned migration over the wire. Maybe use this as the justification to force virtualization upon what you've got. Maybe look into some, I don't know if Azure Data Box or some of these other kind of on-demand show-up resources would help, but it might be something to consider. My angle here is it probably sounds like some of the weather-related stuff that may have happened recently, but my angle is plan on a migration. It's basically a disaster that you're a natural disaster that you're mitigating. Whatever you do, set it up in a way that it won't happen again. Oh, one other tip. This came up to me one time. I was in a shared office space, much like this place here back in the day. And this is crazy, but I don't know if you know this, Brad, but if you're in like a shared office space, in the center of the building, there's like maybe 3 or 4 carriers that come up into the building, and they have like a part of the building that the common, connectivity goes.
Yep.
I had a situation where my ISP went bankrupt, surprise on me.
Wow.
Like instantly, day of. Whoa, no wire. This was in the 90s. Okay, I'll get it. Bear with me though. But I went to my neighbor in the office suite. I'm like, look, my ISP went bankrupt and they pulled the plug on me. Can you throw me a wire? And they did. They said, we're going to put you on this really special, whatever. You got a week. Get on it, so you could maybe look into something like that. Believe it or not, that was a friendly friend that did that.
Yeah, no kidding.
Nice. I don't think I'd do it today, but it was You know, I didn't smoke, but the other IT pro that I worked with, you know, this is one of those smoking pavilion buddies. That's a good camaraderie down there.
Interesting. Yeah,
I was thinking two random ideas, but that's what I come up with.
Throwing the wire over the wall, almost quite literally.
No, it was a drop.
Oh, was it literally
special.
Over the wall?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. It was.
Yeah, that would be under, what did they call it? Social engineering of getting access to a network.
You know, Wi-Fi. Guess Wi-Fi. You know, you could rig it up that way. This was actually, it was before Wi-Fi, so I wasn't quite squirty. I was just really young at the time.
Okay. Well, you know, you live and you learn. We don't see ISPs going bankrupt. I'm assuming was this dial-up back then?
Oh, ouch, Brad.
Or were you
ISDN?
That was my second guess, was ISDN. The only reason I brought dial-up up was that there used to be just tons of those like mom and pop things where you could dial up. And I remember we went through like 5 or 6 growing up because they would just quite literally go bankrupt. You try to dial in with your modem to connect to the internet, and then they just wouldn't exist.
Yeah, you know, the funny thing was, I think that set me on a path to where I am now about planning for things to go wrong. Sure. I mean, because that's something you just don't think of. It's actually, it would be very catastrophic today, but it was catastrophic then as well. But like, that changed my whole approach to resiliency. In fact, this was like in 1996, and then I'm like, you know, setting up site-to-site VPNs, and that was pretty progressive at the time. Yep. You know. Yeah, crazy. Seen some stuff in my day.
Seen some stuff. Well, hopefully everybody listening to this podcast learned some stuff or was entertained by some stuff or something.
Stuff, indeed. And speaking of stuff, can I dish on a piece of stuff?
Yeah, of course.
This week we're launching V11.
V11 is this week?
This week. Tomorrow we got the broadcast, so that would be Wednesday. But for those of you watching it, whenever you're watching it, just go to veeam.com. You can't miss it, guarantee you. Big things. I'll give you two interesting Microsoft plugs that come with that fit to this audience. Number one is we're going to support Azure Archive Storage. So that cold, low cost, long term, what I like to say, write once, read never, but never say never type of storage. Like it's going to be something like that. We're going to make an acronym out of it.
Yeah.
I got to work on that. The second thing is actually what I call doomsday scenario, but really cool, really versatile. Any image-based backup we take, we can restore to Hyper-V now. So you have a VMware machine, Hyper-V.
Oh, like cross-platform then.
Yeah, and convert. Yeah, so like you can take an AWS machine that's running now, boop, instantly recover it on Hyper-V, including Brad, Hyper-V on your Windows 10 PC.
You have piqued the interest. That is
the portability for everyone. Yeah. Well, I mean, because imagine a doomsday scenario. All you have is your backups. You can go to the computer store, get a whole bunch of whatevers, and start running, you know?
Well, there's also a migration story there, too, that if you want to, you know, if you're a whole VMware shop and you're thinking about going to Hyper-V and you need a solution just to convert those VMs.
We've had organizations go from Nutanix to VMware, VMware to Nutanix, Hyper-V to VMware, VMware to Hyper-V, and we haven't been able to do all of the migration scenarios for them, but you know, now we have the engine for it.
Yeah.
And the cloud inclusive. So yeah, it's going to be kind of a big deal. And I could even walk into some test dev use cases. Like, let me take last night's backup and play with it over here. And well, it could be a security concern too, but nonetheless, it's a capability.
No, I'm going to be watching for that because I'm probably honestly going to be writing that up on Petri because that's a pretty big deal. It's a really big deal. Cool, man. Well, we'll be on the lookout for V11 probably. Well, I guess it depends on exactly when you launch it. But roughly about the time this podcast goes up to the webs and out to your podcast little apps, that V11 stuff should be out. Hopefully there'll be links down below into Rick's session and all that good stuff. And everybody else, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We'll catch all of you right back here next time.